Time to go werewolf hunting. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for joining me yet again. I'm so happy you're here. Today I have a review of The Hangman's Belief by Christopher Harvard. This is being published by Free Mouse LLC, and I received a copy from NetGalley in exchange for an honest review. You know, when I started this book, it didn't win me over right away, and I'll get to the reasons why in a minute. I didn't think it was a perfect book, but once I got over my hump and I got into it, it gripped me like it had claws and teeth in deep, and I read the whole thing in essentially one session. Once it got its claws in me, you know, it really pulled me through. I had a great time with this book. So what is it about? We follow a character who's called Fleet, or the Hangman. He goes by both names. And he works for a secret agency that hunts werewolves, essentially. And this is his first solo assignment. So he's been training for a long time, but never on his own. And so he goes to this small town where there has been a report of a killing, and he has to investigate it. And the difficulty is nothing is as it seems in this small town, and the locals don't want to talk, and everything is a little bit, seedy and untrustworthy. And it goes on from there. Right away, I think the idea is compelling. Secret societies that are searching after mythological beings, I think, is a great way, like a great setup for anything. And it actually has a little bit of these kind of detective vibes, at least in the beginning. And I think those will probably die out a little bit as the series continues. But I liked in the beginning this mashup of like investigation and detective mystery work along with the supernatural element that they don't try to hide right from the beginning. Our prologue, we see a werewolf in the prologue, who kills someone. It's a really interesting take on the werewolf mythos. So I won't give away too much about them, but they're over 7 feet tall. They're incredibly strong. They still have their full cognizant capacity when they're werewolves. It isn't the normal understanding of a werewolf. And so it's just an exciting way to play with the mythos. I think he did a great job with that. And overall, I thought the story was really good. This is a debut novel, and it does sometimes feel like a debut novel. And so I'll mention a little bit about that. What I will say is there are a number of reveals throughout the story, and I won't reveal any of them, even though some of them are quite obvious, and they come pretty evenly throughout the story. So I'm going to keep my review dialed back so I don't reveal any of those, but some of those you'll get right away from the earliest parts of the book that you will expect certain reveals, but others are less expected. And I think they all are effective, and I think they're all paced out well and they're set up well. So none of them feel cheap, even the ones that you kind of know are going to happen. They don't feel like he was trying to deceive you. It felt like he was building to them naturally. So this review will kind of work around those. Now let me start by saying the things that didn't work so much for me. And the reason I want to get these out of the way, because it did make it difficult for me to get into the book, but then once I got over it, then I had fun. As I said, this is a debut novel, and he even mentions that it took him over 12 years to write this because he was writing it part-time while he was working in other jobs. What do I mean by when I say it feels like a debut novel? Sometimes some of the dialogue is a little clunky, and some of the writing isn't the best. One thing I think with the writing especially is it's almost entirely from like a third person omniscient point of view. But what happens is we might be having a conversation between two characters, and at one moment he's expressing the interior thoughts of one character, and then he switches to express the interior thoughts of the other character as they're engaging in this dialogue. But there's no indication of how or why he's moving back and forth between characters when he gets to the interior, he being the narrator or the narrative voice. And so it's just a little awkward sometimes when you're like, wait, who is thinking this? And then you have to like read and say, oh, okay, I understand. It's not Fleet, it's Loie who he's talking to, or whatever it is. So some of that just feels awkward. Like it needs to be refined a little more. I think that it makes sense that he didn't want to spend whole chapters dedicated to other points of view. And so he basically followed Fleet and then once in a while moved around. And that makes sense. I think that might have drawn out the story and might have made it feel like padded. So I appreciate that he didn't add fluff that he didn't need, but it just sometimes felt like a whiplash going back and forth to the interior lives of more than one character within the span of one page. So that was a little awkward. I could get over it. I think you can get over it. That aspect of the writing could use a little bit massaging. The other part is that the characters' internal motivations and the way they were represented like moves around a little bit. And so, for example, and I understand why. I understand why, because this is clearly this is called book one. It's clear that he has a multi-book series in mind. And so there's part of the character's identities that he isn't telling right now, that he's keeping things in the back burner because they're going to come up in later books. And some of those seeds are very clearly planted. There are questions left unanswered that deal with who these characters are, where they come from, what they're running away from, that are setting up material that is going to be answered in later books. And so how much he wants to present in this book and how much he wants to hold back is like a push and pull, but you can kind of feel that. And so, for instance, our main character, Fleet, this is his first time doing a mission on his own. And so he's nervous about that. But this isn't his first time doing a mission. He's been training for years and years and years. He's incredibly fierce. He's incredibly strong. He doesn't have reason to be afraid in the way that he is presented in the very beginning of the story. So there are parts in the beginning when it feels like it's his first day on the job, not his first day on a solo mission, and like that. And so his character goes back and forth from being like incredibly strong and ferocious and a brawler to like being afraid of saying the wrong thing to a girl. And it's just like, it doesn't feel consistent. And it feels like he has more than one idea of who this character is supposed to be. And it takes a while to really get into the groove of what this character is and who he is and how he exists in this world. And he does try to give the character some depth, but some of that he wants to hold back and he wants to present it later in future editions. And just trying to balance that was difficult. And I think once we get into the book, then they feel a little more secure in who they are and how they are experiencing the situation. But especially in the beginning, there's like a whiplash going back and forth within any given character. Those kind of things combined with one scene early on when our main character gets to this motel, and for some reason the motel owner decides to have a campfire and roast s'mores and get all of the motel guests to roast s'mores together, which is just like it was a hard scene for me to get through. It just felt so contrived, and no one felt like they're acting in any way that would be normal to like a human being in that experience. The whole thing felt really contrived as a way to just introduce us to these different characters. Like it very clearly was like, how do I get all these characters who, this is the first chapter, how do I get all these characters introduced with enough backstory that then you can play off of it? It did not work for me at all. And I really almost put the book down because I was like, this is really cringy and it is hard to get through. I'm so glad I didn't put it down, because after I got through that, even though some of the writing was a little bit back and forth, I thought the rest of the story was great. I thought the plotting especially was really nice. Like I said, there are a number of reveals and it builds up and it builds up. And then you almost feel like you're getting a very concrete ending, but you're only halfway through the book. And so you know that that's not the ending. And the way he does the reveals and he continues the story and the story continues to amplify, I think is really skillfully done. And a lot of it you see coming. A lot of it is it's what you'd expect in this genre, but it's done well. It's executed well and you have fun the whole time. So even if you say, well, clearly this is going to happen, or clearly this isn't the end, and you are right, because he's setting you up for that. So it doesn't feel deceptive. It doesn't feel like he's trying to trick you, but it just feels like he's saying, this is how this genre works. Let me play with it and exploit it. And it's a lot of fun. So it keeps building, building, building. There are some really, really great action set pieces, more than one, that last multiple pages. They're really long. They're really bloody and gory and violent. And yet they have a great sense of space, of physicality, so you can follow the characters as they're moving. And so, especially for a new author, to be able to write these action scenes in such a cinematic way that feels grounded in reality, I just thought it was really, really, really well executed. There are a number of them, and they're kind of reserved for the second half of the book, but that makes sense in this kind of story because the beginning part is investigation, and it is trying to figure out who did it, how they did it, why, and so forth. And so, of course, these big action set pieces come later in the story, but when they come hard and fast, and there is more than one of them, and all of them are really, really well done. I thought the action writing was really, really great. The writing was, like I said, wasn't perfect, but it flowed really well for the most part. It wasn't colorful or flowery, but it was very kind of direct, but it was what you'd expect in an action adventure kind of story. So it fit the story really well, and it kept pushing the plot forward in a way that felt organic. So even though there were some places I thought the writing was a little rough and could have been polished, overall I thought the writing style was really nice. The way we moved around a little bit between characters in general, I like that we have a little bit wider perspective than just one character. I thought that was handled really well, and the amount of time we spent with the secondary characters I thought was appropriate. The characters themselves were kind of stereotypes, like they're kind of archetypes. There wasn't too much depth to them. Again, though, I think this is in part because there are definite histories there, but he didn't want to give them all away in this story. So I think the main character is really well fleshed out. You could tell he has stuff going on in his past. You could tell that it's not all cut and dry, that what we see here today has a history to it. And so because of that, he felt rounded. He felt somewhat genuine. So even though they weren't perfectly fleshed out 100%, they were given little bits and pieces, and you could tell there's more story there, and you're just waiting to find out in future installments. So I didn't think they were that bad. The other secondary characters were exactly what you'd expect them to be. In general, they didn't have a lot to do, really. The other side characters, the secondary characters, they got like one or two interesting things you'd find out about them, about their character, but the rest was pretty standard. But that was kind of okay. This is not about them, really. They are just providing pieces to the story for our main character, for his development. So I would have liked the characters, the secondary characters, to be a little more robust. I think in future installments, he has set the groundwork that for any of these characters that do come back, there is place for them to grow and there is space for them to grow into, because they weren't so boring or one-sided that they were worth writing off. That there was something in all of the small characters, that there was like, a little bit that you could peek behind the curtain and see something there. So there's somewhere for him to grow. So I hope we get more depth to all the characters in the future books. But in this one, I still like them. I thought it was enough that I felt that they were convincing, given the story, given the genre, given what was going on. As far as like ideas about the book, clearly you're running away from trauma and you are exacting revenge upon these like other creatures as a way to deal with your own like self-doubts and your self-turmoil. And so there is this idea of what can you run away from the monsters you've created in your past, and can you run away from what harm other monsters have done to you, and what does it mean to either run away from that or to face it head on. So there are some interesting things that you can kind of pull out of it, even if that wasn't like the primary intention. But it does a good job of setting up that there's a reason that the events of this story happened the way they did. Maybe we don't understand all of those reasons, but we have enough to feel complete. Like this feels like a complete story, even though it's very clearly setting up for a larger universe, for more books in this series. It still feels complete. So there are questions that are unanswered at the end, but those are the right kind of questions. Like they're questions that don't impact the plot of this particular story, but once you try to find the answer to them, you do open up into more stories in the future. So I thought the author did a really good job of leaving just enough open-ended at the end to really show you that there is more to this world, and there are many other places that this story can go, and you can get deeper into the characters and into their motivations and into the world in general. Some of those questions maybe could have been answered, but it was enough. It was satisfying. The ending was satisfying. Once I got over the hurdle of, like, let's say the first chapter, and a little bit of a stumbling block of some clunky dialogue and some POV switching that feels a little frenetic. If you can get over that, the writing for the most part is smooth. It doesn't feel like it's leading you on, yet it's pulling you through the story. You won't want to put it down. The action is really exciting. The way it's plotted is really smart. It builds in a really organic way that keeps you invested in wanting to find out more and more and more. The characters aren't particularly deep, but they're deep enough that you can tell there's more going on and you want to learn what it is. And you are invested, especially in our main character and what has happened to him in the past that you don't know about. You just know that stuff has happened. And so by the end of the story, you want to know more about him. So in that regard, it's successful. So if you take all of that together, I thought it was a lot of fun. Like I said, I read it in one session, basically. I only stopped to go to sleep, and that's only because I really, really had to. And then I finished it as soon as I got up the next day. It reads really, really quickly. And I can't stress enough, like the action scenes, which are really bloody, they're also creative, inventive, and they were just a lot of fun. Like the whole book was a lot of fun. And I really hope you give it a chance. I hope that my kind of critiques of it don't turn you off from it, because I had a blast reading it. I look forward to reading whatever he does in the future and seeing how he builds out this world. I think it has a lot of potential to be exciting and fun. It was really just a fun read, and that's what I wanted out of it. I will say, I really liked the detective aspect of it, and that only was a little bit in the beginning. And due to how the ending happened and the way the world opened up and what we know about the antagonist, I don't know if we're going to get that kind of detective aspect in the future installments. I hope that Harvard manages to do that, and I hope he leans into the detective aspect a little more, and this investigation and deduction, because I thought that was fun, and I would like to see more of it. I don't know if we're going to. So we'll see what directions he goes in the future. Either way, I think it'll be fun. I look forward to it. Let me know. Have any of you had a chance to read this yet? What do you think about secret agencies that track werewolves? Are you excited to read it? I'd love to hear any of your thoughts down in the comments. I think that's all I've got for today. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I appreciate you. Be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.